misery of knowing you." The words were not totally clear, but both parents ran into the room, and there, in the corner, the television was on. How? The baby was in a cot, and it was an old TV set on a stand from the spare room they'd used for a nursery. It had not even been plugged in. Yet on looking at the channel, they saw David Attenborough describing the canopy of the Amazon rainforest. So who had they heard swearing like that? The next few days, the baby's cot was brought back into their bedroom, yet there were numerous bangs from the tiny room next door. Ray, ever the realist, gave 1,000 explanations, from air in the pipes of the radiator to picking up chatter from the taxi radios on their speakers, all the way through to noise from the neighbour's house, despite them being in a detached house. He knew that none of them covered all that they had experienced, but Christmas was coming. All would be fine. It had to be. They'd spent the year making sure that it would. So finally, it was the night before Christmas, and the toys and the presents lay thick under the tree in the living room. They were in bed, cuddled in, having just watched their favourite Christmas film. All was set when, during the titles, the television switched itself off. On trying to turn on a bedside light, it wouldn't work. The electricity was off everywhere, and the nearest torch was in the bag of tools in the boot of Ray's car. He looked out of the window, and other houses in the street were still emblazoned with light, so he knew it was his lights that had tripped. And on the way downstairs, he bumped into a man going up. He shouted and swore before racing back up the stairs, just as Christine screamed, seeing the shape of a swarthy, thick-set man walk past the curtains. Ray opened them to steal whatever light he could from the street. Together, they walked downstairs, and as she stood at the door, Ray got the torch, then out to the garage to put the trip switch back up. Ray explained, "We were both bricking it. I felt a solid man hit me as I walked upstairs. I heard a grunt and breathing, and then he was up the stairs ahead of me. I ran after him as my wife started yelling. I searched that house from top to bottom. There was no one in there despite us both seeing him. And then the baby started crying, and on getting up there to his room, he was upside down. He couldn't do that himself in a narrow crib, and that made Christine panic, and she just lost it. She grabbed little Anthony and Audrey and took them in with her. Then downstairs, it sounded as if there was a party going on. There was the sound of Christmas songs from the CD player. Children's toys were playing, and there was a stamping around, as if someone was literally just jumping up and down on wooden floorboards. Ray had a dictaphone that he used to list his jobs and keep track of measurements and supplies. He had the presence of mind to switch it on. He caught everything. Then, as he walked downstairs, everything stopped. He was in his living room carrying the dictaphone, and just as he enters the room, there was the roar of an angry man, making him scream and run back out. Ray and Christine arrived at his mother's at 5:40 a.m. with all of their presents and got her out of bed. His wife and children lived there for almost a month. The house was exorcised by a lady called Margaret, spiritualist. She travelled up from Manchester after the local vicar recommended her, saying that the church exorcist was too busy to help. Although she was from the opposite end of the country, she told them, "His name was Edward. He wanted to know why you had ruined his house. He kept walking into walls and tripping over things and decided you had to pay." He was not very happy about moving either. In fact, he broke their big mirror on the top of the stairs. He died in the house, in the room at the top of the stairs. That's where he choked to death. He's gone now. Ray said, "Months ago, this would be something that I would never have believed. My wife started talking to some of the older neighbours from 3 doors down, and they told us that the house we were in had belonged to an old lady called Esther Ray and an obnoxious son called Edward. Once the old lady had died in the early 1960s, he took the house over and used to blaspheme at everybody using the most vile language. No one in the street had anything to do with him. And then, in the late 1980s, he got a tumour in his throat and he could hardly breathe. He had to drag around a canister of oxygen towards the end. He died in his sleep, having choked on his own vomit. And the two families that had moved in since, neither stayed more than a year." How could Margaret have known? She got the train from Manchester and I picked her up from the station. She spoke to no one but us. This is absolute proof. I still have the recording of him, and it was the worst Christmas present my family ever had.
Night Owls on Metro Radio with Max Merch. Get the ideal Christmas gift